Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for our Friday weekend edition of Point of View. In studio with me, I have Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute. And gentlemen, I'm so glad both of you are here. In today's Wall Street Journal, and I've got the print edition, we get it delivered to our house. And, of course, it's highlighted. I guess you all can see. This is Jeremy Dye's editorial on the Bladensburg Cross entitled, "Is a War Memorial's Cross Illegal? 3 federal judges decide a century-old monument violates the Constitution." Certainly we've talked about the Bladensburg Cross many times. But, Kelly, I'll go to you first. This was a miracle of timing, wasn't it?
It really was. The idea that this ended up landing on a Friday morning, the very day that, just because of rescheduling and everything else, probably because Kavanaugh wasn't on the court, there were a certain number of cases the Supreme Court kicked to next sessions. Bladensburg was one of them, and it landed on today. So
they're considering it today.
Today, they're voting on whether to take the case or not. And that's the day that the article appears in the Wall Street Journal. So I would encourage everybody to pray, because we won't find out until next week. But it's on the schedule. So is the Coach Kennedy case as well.
Today, again?
Today, yeah. Sometimes they will say, well, we didn't have time. We'll move that to the next time when we conference. But this is just 9 justices in a room by themselves, no one else there. The secretary is the junior justice, so Justice Kavanaugh will be keeping the notes.
Wow.
And they just vote on the cases, which ones they're taking. And so I would encourage people really to pray. But yeah, if they haven't seen this article, it's an excellent article, this editorial in the Wall Street Journal. It's on pointofview.net, and it's going to be posted. So I would encourage people not only get that, read it, but share it with other people, because a lot of people don't even know that this case is going on, and it's got some great history in this editorial that I think people will really be moved by.
I'm glad Jeremy put all the history in there of this different soldiers who were memorialized there. They aren't even buried in the U.S., so it was considered by some of the moms put the cross up. It was considered, that's when they had a funeral, it was because they had a memorial, and they were able to, now their families can look at this cross and think of them. But it is at pointofview.net, and the Wall Street Journal is by subscription, unless you get the print. Well, I have a subscription too, but so people can't just go and look it up and read the whole article, but they can by going to pointofview.net, so people can share from us. But Lathan, I know that you try to time things sometimes in the media with what First Liberty does, but this one was God, wasn't it?
Yeah, I would love to be able to say this was the legal communications team at First Liberty doing what we do best, but I can't. No, this is great timing, and hopefully a few of those justices read the Wall Street Journal this morning before they came into work, or as they were sitting in their offices getting ready for conference. We hope they saw that editorial. It was really good. As you said, reminding people of the history of that memorial. and that it was put up by the mothers of these men who didn't come home. And at the time, the mothers would have had no way of visiting their sons' actual gravestones. And so at least one mother, Mrs. Redmond, when she wrote to her senator about it, explained in her letter, I consider this to be my son's gravestone. Because when it went up, as I said, they would not have been able to cross the Atlantic and go visit the actual burial place for their sons. So it was obviously very sacred to them, and that's why they chose the shape of the memorial that they did. They chose the cross shape to be as close as it could be to the actual gravestone their sons were buried under. So, the American humanists come along and make some argument that this is somehow violating the Establishment Clause by having a cross on government property. They're basically ignoring two really important facts. Number one, the reason it's in that shape, that it is to mimic the gravestone of the men that it memorializes. And two, the fact that it's on government property. Well, it's on government property because the government took the property. It was
private.
It was originally owned by the American Legion, our client, who donated the land for the memorial. It didn't become government property until the government was building a highway and took the property via eminent domain so that they could do maintenance and continue building the highway. And even then, they literally went out of their way not to disturb the memorial. If you go and you see this place where it is, the road curves around it. So they built this memorial, which was also, I believe, called it the Veterans Memorial Highway, around
so the
this
highway
memorial, so
was
as not
named
to
after
disturb
it too.
Right. So a couple of really important facts about that memorial that I hope the court will consider as they vote on whether or not to take this case.
And the huge implications of it are this is right outside of D.C. And this court, within its jurisdiction, is not just the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial, this cross, but Arlington National Cemetery. And if this stands, if the court does not take this case, that precedent will require going into Arlington National Cemetery and tearing down large freestanding crosses. I mean, it's unthinkable what this will mean. So many people feel like that the court is really going to have to take this case, but they'll do what they're going to do. So we'll see what happens. We will get notice next week, but they are literally voting on that today.
This sort of the news for so many weeks we've been covering the Kavanaugh confirmation, and literally he was confirmed and then he hit the ground running. The court is already the Supreme Court had already opened its session, and here he is in place strategically now for this very important case. I think it's just a reminder of the consequences of these things, which also, and we'll talk about this throughout the show today, also reminds us and sort of reemphasize the consequences of elections. And we've got these elections coming up. The U.S. Senate is up for grabs, but things are looking a little bit better there. And that's what we're going to do after the break. But I'll just let you comment, Lathan, a little bit very quickly, because I know you mentioned to me there was an article about the race between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke, which we've been on edge about, and it's opening up a little bit, isn't it?
Thankfully so, yes. It's still closer than it should be, frankly, and people need to make sure that they get out and do their civic duty and never vote alone. I always say, take somebody with you. But yes, I was just reading an article right before I came over here on Politico, not exactly a right-leaning website, but entitled, Please Stop the Press Before They Do Another Profile of Beto O'Rourke. So it looks as if some people are starting to read the tea leaves and see the polls that maybe Beto is not the liberal savior they thought that was going to turn Texas blue. And some of the pundits are now kind of backtracking, trying to back off of that, see if they
can.
That prediction, exactly. So, but nothing is done until Election Day, so it's still very important.
Don't take anything for granted, ladies and gentlemen. Early voting will start soon in Texas, and the elections will be soon after that. So take part. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In addition to my study of the millennial generation is my current research on the generation following them. Gene Twenge has given them the name iGen because their generation has always had digital devices like the iPod and the iPhone. They were born between 1995 and 2012. In fact, the leading edge of the iGen generation are now graduating from college. In many ways, they are different from previous generations, and here are just a few characteristics that Gene Twenge talks about in her book and articles. First, it appears that iGen is more focused on work than the millennial generation. A higher percentage of them are willing to work overtime to get a job done. That changed perception might have to do with the fact that they experienced the Great Recession a number of years ago. Second, the iGen generation is taking longer to work, drive, and date than previous generations. This will no doubt have an impact on their workplace. Twenge observes that managers who learn to be cheerleaders for millennials will find that they are more like therapists, life coaches, or parents for iGeners. Third, the iGen generation is not as confident as the millennial predecessors. Various surveys show that they are less confident about their career prospects. They have lower self-confidence than the previous generation at the same age. The latest generation also seems very concerned with safety. They have turned out to be safe drivers. They're less likely to binge drink than the previous generations, and they want emotional safety, meaning they want to be protected from offensive comments and conflict. Finally, they're obviously tied to their phones and social media. They are likely to socialize using their phones rather than getting together in person. And if we want to reach this new generation, we need to see how they are different, due both to their social experiences and their digital devices. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Hi, everybody. This is Gary Bauer with American Values in Washington, D.C. You know, I've been involved in big battles in Washington for many, many years. And in those battles, time and time again, it's been Point of View Radio and Kirby Anderson who's provided me with a platform to sound the alarm. It doesn't matter whether the battle was over the sanctity of human life or preserving religious liberty or defending marriage. Kirby Anderson and Point of View have always been there standing strong. That's why today I'm asking you to join me in giving the most generous contribution you can to Point of View Radio. You know, Point of View and Kirby don't get big subsidies from Washington, D.C. like some liberals do. They depend on generous donors like you who believe in family, faith, and freedom.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
It's nice to hear from Gary Bauer, and he's been appearing on Point of View for probably, well, I would say 30 years, before I was ever around, and I don't know, probably before you, Kelly. Mm-hmm. Gary Bauer's been here weighing in on the issues of the day. So thanks to him, and we are always so grateful when he gives us a little boost when we're trying to amass our Truth Team 360. And ladies and gentlemen, you are part of that team. If you are one that either supports us monthly or just sends generous donations. So we appreciate it, and we want to say thank you and encourage you to continue. So Lathan Ford, Kelly Shackelford from First Liberty Institute are here with me, and we're talking politics a little bit because, of course, so we have the midterm elections, and in this case, we're looking at we don't really know what's going to happen in the House of Representatives, but it's actually looking a little bit better for retaining the House and a lot better for retaining the Senate. And one of the reasons is because our Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who most of us thought would coast to reelection because he ran for president, because he's such a great spokesperson in the U.S. Senate, just a brilliant orator, but somebody came from the left and tried to actually got a lot of support from outside the state to try to take that seat. So we've been watching that. We've been working hard to counter Beto O'Rourke. And so what's going on now, Lathan? I mean, you mentioned that Politico was kind of starting to pull back and not be so complacent about that O'Rourke-Cruz race.
I think that article indicates, that some of the same people who have hyped O'Rourke for over a year now, as it's coming down the home stretch and you're starting to see the polls, Cruz starting to get a little bit of a lead now. I think it may be, some of the same people that thought they could sort of help push O'Rourke across the finish line are seeing, well, maybe that's not so likely to happen, and maybe we need to back off of this a little bit. And now you start to see some folks on the left kind of pointing the fingers, like, well, we got fooled again. Like it's going to be another. I don't think it's going to be like another Wendy Davis where they lose by 20, but. I think if conservatives are as energized as they seem to be, especially coming off of the Kavanaugh hearings, I think if there was any enthusiasm gap, it is gone now. Yeah. I think that fired up people in a way no one really anticipated that it could. And so now I think you're starting to see some folks on the left just starting to maybe the bloom is off the rose a little bit with Robert Francis O'Rourke. And
the amount of money, Kelly, that has been put into this race, they've got to be thinking, wow, we probably could have used that better elsewhere.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Just in the last quarter, they just came out with the numbers today. O'Rourke had $36 million come in just in the last quarter, and Cruz had 12. So you can see how Cruz was being totally outspent. And by the way, that money was not mostly from Texas.
Right.
It was coming from, California and Hollywood and these places. The problem is that as you get closer to the election, sort of the glamour isn't the way people look at things. When you get closer, people start saying, okay, let's find out where these people stand. And, look, Robert O'Rourke, might do well in a lot of places. But what he stands for is not going to win him in Texas, with the electorate. Being in favor of impeachment, which he came out in favor of impeachment. Being in favor of, saying he would have voted against Kavanaugh. Again, not a good position in Texas.
Abolishing ICE in Texas.
Abolishing ICE. I mean, Texas has a border. They like having people to protect the border and do something about people once they're in here that shouldn't be here, that are engaging in violent crime. So yes, they like ICE. The quote he gave and the sort of the YouTube that they pushed out about there's nothing more American than in the middle of the national anthem to take a knee. Yeah. Again, that might do great in some states. I don't know. I'm guessing some states. Not Texas. That's probably about the worst, thing you could say.
Followed closely by supporting a $10 a barrel tax
on oil. Yeah. So as these things,
Medicare for all. Yeah, that's another. I mean, it sounds good, but I think most people in Texas are smart enough to add up the cost.
Now, I'll say this though. They really had a sophisticated, and still do. I mean, what are they going to do with this $36 million? My guess is the next 3 weeks, Texans are going to get just deluged with, O'Rourke ads and all kinds of things. And I don't think I've talked to anybody in Texas who hasn't got a text message from the O'Rourke campaign. They have a very, very extensive, sophisticated, and there are a lot of attempts to register young people to vote. But again, this is Texas we're talking about. And so the governor's up by 20 points, I think. The lieutenant governor's up by the same. there is a huge margin that you have to make up if you're a Democrat running statewide in a state with 25 million people. I mean, you've got a huge deficit that you've got to make up. And so even if O'Rourke did do well, which I think he's going to do well based upon what he was having to fight against, but I still think that puts him way away from the finish line and being able to win. And on the other side, for the Republicans, I mean, if it did happen, it would be an absolute disaster for the Republican Party. I mean, for instance, Kavanaugh probably wouldn't have got through if you just switched these two. And so think about the next. I mean, 15 judges were just voted through yesterday. 16 more were just announced 2 days ago. All that will be coming in the future. And this Senate seat, whether it's Democrat, Republican, and it's that way in the other states that we're talking about as well. But certainly the Texas one would be a body blow that I think the Republican Party could not even conceive, which is why so much money has been pouring in from Hollywood and all these other places.
Well, Texas is seen as really probably the most conservative state in the country on many things, and certainly the most conservative, highly prosperous state in the country. And so to have that happen, they would just have so many arguments and talking points that they would pull out of that it doesn't work and these policies are bad for the people and people don't like them in Texas, when people in Texas are mostly pretty happy and a lot of people are moving here. So it's going to be interesting. And I just encourage folks listening, I know a lot of you in Texas listen to this hour, to get involved and vote. I mean, I think registration is done, but voting now is going to start in about a week, Lathan?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 2 weeks usually.
A week from Monday is early voting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, vote early or vote on Election Day, but vote and bring your friends and your family.
Exactly. Vote early, but don't vote often. The Attorney General's office may have something to say about that.
Multiply your vote by bringing people. And that brings up another issue that we will discuss after this break. And that is, it's very important to fight voter fraud, because if for anyone who votes fraudulently for the other candidate from what you're voting for, that negates your vote. And so many people voting conservatively lose that power, that constitutional right that you have, because the voter system is filled with fraud. And that's why in Texas, we've made a concerted effort to try to fight it. We've certainly tried to get voter ID laws, and that's been stopped by the courts. But that's a battle that needs to continue. And so we've got some good news coming out of the Attorney General in Texas office about that, and so we'll talk about it. But ladies and gentlemen, I do want to encourage you here at Point of View to be a part of this sort of push we have right now to encourage you to be part of our Truth Team 360. We exist because of your donations. We exist because of your support and your prayers. And this is a time when we're really trying to shore that up, to add people to be monthly givers, and to add people just to participate in our program in a financial way. So ask God and dig deep and stay with us. We'll be right back.
April 18th, 1775. The long-feared approach of danger was now real. The British were moving, and Paul Revere mounted his horse for a ride that would go down in history in the battle for American liberty. 2 beacons were placed in the steeple of the Old North Church, alerting the people in Charlestown the Redcoats were coming by sea. 2 beacons shining in the night, signaling our forefathers to make their stand. Today's threats to our freedom are perhaps less visible than an army on the move, but they are no less real. Where are today's beacons, today's defenders of liberty? One is Point of View Radio. The other is you. Together, let us stand for all of our freedoms to preserve what our founders won. Be the fire in our beacon today by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Join the fight this week at pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team, or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And Kelly Shackelford, President and CEO of First Liberty Institute. Lathan Watts, Director of Communications at First Liberty Institute. And I'm so glad both of you are here today because of the subject matter of the program today. Everything is religious liberty oriented and really election oriented. That's your expertise. So we mentioned before the break, our Attorney General Ken Paxton has had this unit that has been investigating voter fraud. And Lathan, maybe you can explain what he's come up with. There's already 4 indictments, correct?
Correct. Yeah, he did a press release today on these 4 indictments, multiple counts of voter fraud, part of basically a voter fraud ring that his office has been targeting, trying to break up. And so that's a significant step forward. I'm sure there are probably more on the list, hopefully more to come, but these people will be facing real jail time for what they did, and deservedly so. I mean, our election process is the basis of our whole system of government, and people have to know that the integrity of that process can be trusted, and voter fraud robs everyone of that, not to mention the specific people that they robbed of their vote. And then, as you mentioned right before we went to break, that also sort of counteracts other people's votes who may have been voting for somebody other than who these fraudsters were voting for. So I was very happy to see that. Congrats to Attorney General Paxton and all his team, and keep up the good work. It's vitally important for our electoral process that people can trust that process, but it also highlights people need to be very careful about how they vote and protecting their own identity, especially if you vote by mail. If you or your parents or grandparents vote by mail is more common, I think, amongst elderly people because it's more convenient for them. In fact, it's kind of what it's designed for, so that they can do it via mail. If they're not exactly mobile and getting to a polling place would be a challenge for them. So if you've got people in your life that vote by mail, help them be on the lookout for this sort of thing, and to make sure that
I guess one thing would be
counts.
If you order a ballot by mail, make sure you get it.
Absolutely.
If it doesn't come back to you, then it went somewhere.
Yeah, in this case, it was taking advantage of elderly people with their their mail-in ballots, and I think there was although it was 4 different people, I think there's 20 different counts against them. And so, they're talking about years and years and years in prison. And I think that's great because this message needs to go out that anybody out there who's doing this type of thing, I think is going to think very, hard about it now. Because, you could very easily get caught. People are being caught. This was outside of Fort Worth, I think. But I think this is great. We probably should have gotten a number for where people can call the Texas Attorney General and say thank you, because this is something that very few politicians have done in the past, is really go after voter fraud. But I think it's so important because it doesn't take very many of these examples to convince everybody in the state to say, well, that's not worth it. I don't want to go to jail for 20 years to get however many votes they're getting, which might not even make any difference anyway. Right. So I think this could really discourage others from, engaging in voter fraud.
You've been looking at this probably all across the country for a long time. And do you think that most of this fraud happens on one side or the other of the political aisle?
Well, I haven't seen a lot of it occur on the Republican side. It's almost always on the Democratic side. There might be some exceptions, but you just don't see it, in the ones we've seen in the prosecutions and the actual convictions. They've been almost always on the Democratic side. A lot of times it's if it doesn't involve the mail-in ballots like this, it involves people who aren't registered to vote, who are maybe they're illegal immigrants, and so which matches with the Democrat position versus the Republican position on people coming over legally versus illegally over the border. So it seems to be on the Democratic side, but I think it's bad for everybody because it cancels out everybody's vote, people who are legally voting. And it really is just horrific to take advantage of elderly people who can't get outside of their home in that way. That you're stealing their vote, and you're taking away other people's vote as well because you're casting a vote that might be against who you're voting for, and that's not how it's supposed to work.
So, is this effort being taken place and undertaken in other states across the country, or is Texas one of the leaders in doing? I mean, I know we have a very conservative Attorney General in Ken Paxton. He's law and order, big time, and I know in most states where those types of people are being elected now these days. So is this an effort that's taking place?
You don't hear about it enough at all. I think very few states are doing this. This started, I know, under Attorney General Abbott. There was a focus on this as well. He's now the governor of Texas, and Attorney General Paxton. But this is probably the best sort of set of indictments, and if the convictions occur, this will be one of the more important, fraud convictions on voter fraud that we've seen. And so I think because there was one just recently, but it was one person voting illegally. That's not the same as this. This is like an operation, a fraud ring, where they're all working together to get these people.
There may be a lot more.
Yes, I'm sure there are. I'm sure this is the tip of the iceberg. But the point is, you start nailing a few of these, and people start going to jail, and that begins to stop.
Yeah, deterrent factor.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you mentioned, is this sort of thing going on in other states as far as the emphasis on it? I haven't really seen other states put the sort of emphasis on it that Texas has. But then you also consider there are states who are enacting measures that honestly make this sort of thing easier to do. I mean, you have states that want to give ID to people who are in the country illegally, and they're opposed to voter ID laws. Some of the people that are advocating those sorts of things will argue that voter fraud doesn't even exist. That that's just this.
It's sort of a political straw man.
A straw man. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. This is a straw man that the Republicans always bring up when they want to do voter ID laws, because voter ID laws are discriminatory against minorities and all that. It just feeds into their whole view of politics anyway. So hopefully, as Kelly said, hopefully this will discourage some people who might be approached to do something like this. Say, look, there are real consequences for doing this here in Texas, and maybe encourage some other states to start looking at it a little harder and putting some resources into their own states to prevent this sort of thing from happening. And as you start to see it more and more across the country, maybe we can sort of clean up some elections in other places as well.
One other piece of, sort of timely event that's taking place this weekend. This is on a whole, this is like doing a right turn in a sense, but there's a movie coming out this weekend. Actually, today it will open in 750 theaters across the country, the Gosnell movie. Kirby, I think, in the last couple of weeks, interviewed the producers. And I was at a conference, and Kelly was also there last weekend, and we actually got to hear from them. They used to be liberals, and they have done a turnaround when they looked into the Gosnell case in Pennsylvania and saw what was going on. And really, it's a matter of murder, because a lot of babies that he was attempting to abort were actually born, and then he would snip the spinal cords. And, of course, it was a trial. The trial was ignored by the media, and that's what the movie is about. And, the movie is not gross or graphic to watch, from what I understand. Well, actually, I've seen a raw cut of it. The book that they wrote it's very descriptive, but the movie isn't. So you can take your kids and you can take people who are squeamish, because it's the story. And even that is so compelling. So it's important for this type of movie, which will tell a story and also may affect the election because of the issue of life. It's important to have a movie like this do well the first weekend. I know a lot of churches and different groups have bought out theaters. And I do know of a lot of tickets available in Waco, Texas. If you live there, if you're listening, call us and we can get you some of those tickets. So you can call our call-in line, 800-351-1212 if you're interested in that.
And it's important because I think depending upon how well they do this weekend is determining whether this is going to go on Netflix. And
That's
so
right.
It's really important that people go out and really get the support that it needs this weekend.
So, and you know, it was very interesting. The producers were saying how it dovetails with the accusations that Kavanaugh's going to be the one to make sure Roe versus Wade is overturned. So putting this issue out there right before the election, it wasn't done on purpose, but it's actually happened and worked out. It's another one of those things that worked out well. We'll be back. The divorce rate is falling in America. According to an analysis of U.S. Census Bureau data, it fell 18% from 2008 to 2016, even after controlling for factors such as an aging population. University of Maryland sociology professor Philip Cohen found the drop was still 8%. Underneath this trend, there's both good and bad news. The good news is the marriages of Generation Xers, and to a greater extent millennials, are lasting longer. Couples are marrying later. They are more highly educated, a marker for marital stability. The bad news is that poorer and less educated Americans are choosing cohabitation over marriage. They may raise kids together, but their relationships are less durable. The marriage rate is dropping, and marriage is becoming what Alan Jacobs of the Institute for Family Studies calls a far more exclusive institution. Then there's the trend called gray divorce. The divorce rate among baby boomers has always been high, and it still is. It doubled for people ages 55 to 64 during the period from 1995 to 2015, and tripled for Americans 65 and older. This renders the drop among young people particularly striking, according to Susan Brown, a sociology professor at Bowling Green State University. She predicts the overall divorce rate will see a sustained decline in the coming years. So, the primary driver of this is a sort of inequality, where less educated young people think they have to wait to marry until they can afford a splashy wedding. A couple of out-of-wedlock kids come along, and they never get around to tying the knot. And the idea that grandparents are divorcing at high rates, how sad for them, their kids, and their grandkids, who only have pictures of past family traditions and togetherness that will never be part of their own lives. The next generation requires strong families to stand against massive cultural headwinds. These kiddos deserve married parents and grandparents. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
This is Nancy from El Paso, Texas, and I strongly support Point of View, and I really would encourage all of you to contribute to this program, continuing and being able to reach out to others. The money that they get from us makes a difference in production, in writing, as well as getting the coordination necessary to present an adequate and complete program. It's a way of God reaching out to all of us.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts are here. We just mentioned the Gosnell movie, which opens today. and this weekend. And the Daily Signal says it's the most important movie you've never heard of. It was like the most important trial you'd never heard of during during the actual trial, because the media was very late to begin covering it. It was like almost done by the time reporters decided to cover the story. But there's another piece in the Daily Signal called The True Story of Kermit Gosnell and His Victims, and it's actually an interview that they did with the producer, Ann McElhaney. I thought Kirby had interviewed her already, but it turns out Nick Pitts will be interviewing her a week from Wednesday. And so you won't want to miss that. But the problem with that is this weekend is very important for that movie. And so, I mean, here in Dallas, you're not going to be swimming because the weather has cooled off. So maybe you could go to the movies on Saturday or Sunday afternoon or even tonight and see the movie. I recommend it. I did see a rough cut of it, and it's well done and compelling, but not gross, not gratuitous, even though what he did is absolutely disgusting. But, you know, it's really murder, and late-term abortion is another one of the themes. And I think really law enforcement and the power of the pro-choice, pro-abortion mindset in the media and in our culture. And Kelly, to me, it's just amazing that it wouldn't have, first of all, that clinic in Philadelphia would have been able to operate for something like 17 years without being investigated. And then what was going on in there, and then just the media and their, disinterest in it.
Yeah, and they would have never found out what was going on outside of his prescriptions, his illegal use of prescription drugs. He was doling out, things to people. That's why it caught their attention. And then when they got in and saw what was going on, that was just like a horror, movie. But it's a powerful. It's a real powerful movie for people who. So if you can get somebody to come who's maybe not big on either way on abortion, or maybe they're very pro-abortion, this is a true story. It's pretty powerful in sort of helping them look at and see what happened with Gosnell, and to really be thinking about the implications of their position. So I know my wife was saying she's got a group of young ladies that she teaches in a Bible study, and they were going to get together this weekend, and she's like, I think we're going to all go to the movie. So, I mean, a lot of people can do that same thing this weekend and make a real difference.
And we have posted this interview that the Daily Signal's Daniel Davis did, Kermit Gosnell and His Victims. If you read just a little way down in that, there's a spot that actually you can click on to find out what theaters it's in. And, I'm assuming it's fairly up to date, but you can also, look it up in your local area. But it's on 750 theaters across the country. And it's just something that needs to go far and wide. And to get it, really well attended this weekend and get it on Netflix would be absolutely huge.
Yeah, I mean, the culture war is only over when we stop fighting it. And it's easy to get discouraged if you watch what comes out of major media these days, the types of movies that are made, types of TV shows that are made, just the slant of news. I can see how people get discouraged, but when something like this comes along, you have to support it, because nothing will change if people don't engage with stuff like this. And as you said, if it gets a large following in the theaters that it's in this weekend, that could then lead to it being on Netflix and getting a much wider audience. And you never know who's going to see that and be influenced by it to make maybe a life-altering decision.
It's faced tremendous opposition. I think there was some sort of a pre-opening in Austin, and Planned Parenthood was out protesting it. The movie took forever to be made, and it was hard to get someone to fund it, and it was actually crowdfunded.
That's what's amazing, yeah. It was crowdfunded. Over $3 million, I think, which has never happened.
Yeah, that was a first. So it just shows that, the battle lines are drawn, and it's a culture of life versus a culture of death, and both are very powerful in this country. But it's wonderful to see that this movie was actually made, and it's out there in theaters. There's another piece of good news that we might want to report on, because this, I don't know how much Kirby has covered this on Point of View, but I'm sure you've read about this pastor from North Carolina, Andrew Brunson, who's been incarcerated in Turkey. And he was actually a few months ago released to house arrest, but it was just a trumped up charge, and he was accused of being in cahoots with this coup, I guess, against the leader of Turkey, and it was just trumped up. So anyway, there was a hearing today, and apparently he's being released to come back to the United States. It's very good news, and so we're happy to report that.
And there's a couple of people to thank for that. I mean, number one, a good friend of mine that many people know, Jay Sekulow,
Yes.
who really has been championing this for probably 2 years. And so that's excellent. But the other is the president of the United States.
Yes.
I mean, President Trump is the only reason why he is free, and I think everybody knows that. I mean, that people criticize the president for coming out so strong in protecting Pastor Brunson, so much so that we ended up, doing some sanctions against Turkey, and it ended up crashing their monetary system somewhat. I mean, really harmed them in the market. And so they were bleeding, a lot of money because of their stance on this. So this was supposedly worked out behind the scenes. What they did is they said, well, he was guilty, but they're going to credit him with time served and let him go.
Well, he's already served 2 years, so
Yes,
I think that it worked out.
And so that was the deal they worked out, although they supposedly don't even have anything like time served. But that was the deal. And so the point is he's free, and he's free really because the president really did some things that he was criticized for. And as a result, Pastor Brunson is, I think flying to Germany and then to the United States. So it's Turkey is 8 hours ahead of us. So that's an answer to a lot of people who I know were in prayer.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have so much to cover in the next hour. We hope you'll stick with us because we moved to our national broadcast. And so we saved some of these important stories for that. We are going to go back to some of First Liberty's important cases that have had developments this week. We'll do that. I want to send you to pointofview.net. We talked about the Bladensburg Cross, but we've put an article that shows pictures of a cross in Greece that was actually torn down, just to give a contrast, just to kind of show what we're fighting here. And, some of the facts are different and some are the same. We're going to talk about this speeding up of judicial confirmations, which Mitch McConnell has got to be credited, not only for his handling of the Kavanaugh confirmation, but all these federal courts. We'll talk about that. We're going to talk about Hillary Clinton and Trump and how they differ on civility, and a little bit about the mob, and also Google. Are they censoring conservative speech? Are they a good censor? They think they are. We'll be right back.
It's called normalcy bias, and studies estimate around 70% of people suffer from it even after disaster strikes. Normalcy bias says even though things might look bad, somehow everything will continue as it always has. But in times of great threat, that assumption can be deadly. If freedom is to be preserved, people like you and I have to work just as hard as those who are trying to restrict religious freedom, those who reject the godly wisdom that brought us liberty. Point of View has been a beacon of truth for more than 45 years, but we dare not assume that will always be the case. Be the fire in our beacon today. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Take a few moments right now and visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. Be among those who see the threat and take action. Be a beacon of truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. They're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. A piece of news in the form of a tweet from Chuck Grassley, who is head of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's been in the news a lot lately. He says, glad to report so far this Congress, the Senate, has confirmed 84 federal judges, 2 SCOTUS, 2 Supreme Court justices, and 29 circuit plus 53 district judges, including 16 just this past week. And I expect we will confirm all remaining judges on floor and any more judges the Judiciary Committee processes this year before the end of Congress. And Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts are here with me in studio. This is such good news. And I think that, we've kind of been reading about a push to get this to happen. And a lot of Democrats who are in tight races, could lose their seats in the Senate, are anxious to get back to their communities to campaign before the election. So I think McConnell had the perfect opportunity to push this. And it's happened, Kelly.
Yep. He's said this publicly, and I know when I met with him a couple of months ago, he said, because I said there are 81 judges waiting for a vote, and I said, are you going to get these people through this year? Because if not, the Senate could change and they could die, on the vine, essentially. Mm-hmm. And these are excellent judges, for the most part. I mean, almost every one of them. And he said, absolutely. And I said, what if we have a Supreme Court spot open up? I was just guessing. I didn't know. And I said, will we still get all 81 of these through? And he said, he looked at me directly and said, every single one of them. And he has followed through on his promise. What happened this week is 2 different things. Everybody's focused on Kavanaugh. Meanwhile, all the other judges are being set up, which is, number one, 16 more nominations were announced this week.
So the White House came up with 16 more.
Yes. And 15 more judges were confirmed yesterday. Now you say, well, how can they do so many?
They could have been doing it all along.
Well, here's what's going on. I just think this is a real abuse of the system, what the Democrats have been doing. They've been holding up all the president's appointments for everything by using this 30-hour debate rule, which is meant for if you really have a problem with somebody to allow some time, but they're using it on everybody, even people they all vote for.
So that's 30 hours per nominee.
Per nominee, which it means the president never gets his appointments, which is not what's supposed to happen. But so what McConnell started to do is play a little more hardball now, which he has the ability to do. And so what this is yesterday they said, okay, we can either be in session from now through the election, the next 3 weeks, and we will get 15 nominees, 15 judicial candidates
but
through.
You'll be stuck in D.C.
That's right. Or you can agree to 15 and to a number of the presidents, not just the judges. I think next week they've agreed to consent to a number of non-judicial people to get through, and we will let you go the next 3 weeks. Well, this has to be unanimous consent. And a number of these Democrats are like, well, I'm not going to participate in that. But after a number of their buddies talked to them and said, you're going to kill my election, they came together. It's amazing how people can come together. And they came together, and all 15 of those judges were confirmed yesterday. So that's what McConnell did. And as soon as they get back, it's obvious that Grassley and McConnell, from what Grassley, what you just read, they're planning to get the rest of these through. And whether they have to do them 30 hours at a time, whatever they have to do, they've got to get these people through. And they know that before the election, because you never know what will happen in the election. And even after the election, either way, they're going to want to get these people through and move them through and not have a backlog.
Lathan, you never know what's going to happen before the election, and just the simple fact that they're doing this could affect the election. I think it will show that the Republicans are doing what they said they'd do.
Yes, I mean, that is something for them to campaign on. Here's a deliverable. We said we were going to confirm judges, and we did. At the same time, it puts the other side on the spot as far as, do we stay here or do we go home and campaign? But then, they have to go home and explain to probably a very angry Democrat base, why'd you let all these judges through?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's going to impact, that could impact turnout for them on their own, from their own voters as well, from the Democrats. And then, Kelly mentioned an important point that these appointments and the Dems' efforts to block them is not just judges, that there are high-level appointments in the executive branch that have been waiting on votes. I think some of the ones that they were going to do next week that Kelly was mentioning are like Assistant Secretary of State level appointments.
So these are appointments that will allow this president to do his job,
run the government.
That's what's been in operation here.
Absolutely,
hamstringing him.
Yeah, exactly. So now you have, and I think it's important that in that quote you got from Grassley that he mentioned, we're going to do this. We're going to get them through the end of this Congress, because that means that includes the lame duck session. So you have an election in November. They can come back before all the new people are sworn in January. There's typically a lame duck session there in December with the current Congress, because the current Congress doesn't end until the new people are sworn in January. So it's important that he mentioned that we are going to get this done through this Congress, because that means they're going to hold people's feet to the fire during the lame duck session as well. And I think you will see many more judges get their votes.
And perhaps other nominees, too.
And, probably some more nominees.
One thing we didn't mention, Penna, which we should, most people have a hard time following this because this is really inside baseball as far as being able to watch it online. They don't know where to go.
And it's not reported in the news, really.
No.
Except here.
And so we actually, at First Liberty, we are now collecting this information. So people can go to firstliberty.org. We have maps that we update each day on the judges, which ones are confirmed so far, which ones are waiting for votes to be confirmed. It shows you where they are. You can click on it. You can look at who that person is. So if people really want to follow this regularly, I just highly encourage them to go to firstliberty.org and just even sign up for the alert that comes out every 2 weeks, because we just sent one out Tuesday of this week, and we showed them the updated maps, the links to the maps. But you can follow this all the time, because it's going to be hard to find this information. You've got to kind of be following the Judiciary Committee, the Senate Committee. You got to be looking at these people. And even if you found what happened, you wouldn't know who they were and where a lot of these things are opening up. And so we have that all at firstliberty.org for people to look at and to follow the judges.
It's very user-friendly.
Yes, and it's incredible. And I just tell people, this is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we have 80-something through right now, and people focus on the fact that Trump has now, if you look at the Court of Appeals, the Federal Court of Appeals, right underneath the Supreme Court, President Trump has now replaced 1 out of every 6 judges, and these are lifetimes. So this is going to last for 30, maybe 40 years. But here's the thing. We've only had, I think, 82, 83 judges through at this point. There are like 160 or so that are either waiting to be filled or about to be announced that need to be filled. So that's why the election's so big in the Senate, is the Senate has to be of his party or they won't be able to get his nominees through. And that's what the elections are going to determine as far as who controls the Senate, whether they're going to be able to get these judges through the next 2 years.
If you needed to have a reason to vote, that's it. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In addition to my study of the millennial generation is my current research on the generation following them. Gene Twenge has given them the name iGen because their generation has always had digital devices like the iPod and the iPhone. They were born between 1995 and 2012. In fact, the leading edge of the iGen generation are now graduating from college. In many ways, they are different from previous generations, and here are just a few characteristics that Gene Twenge talks about in her book and articles. First, it appears that iGen is more focused on work than the millennial generation. A higher percentage of them are willing to work overtime to get a job done. That changed perception might have to do with the fact that they experienced the Great Recession a number of years ago. Second, the iGen generation is taking longer to work, drive, and date than previous generations. This will no doubt have an impact on their workplace. Twenge observes that managers who learn to be cheerleaders for millennials will find that they are more like therapists, life coaches, or parents for iGeners. Third, the iGen generation is not as confident as the millennial predecessors. Various surveys show that they are less confident about their career prospects. They have lower self-confidence than the previous generation at the same age. The latest generation also seems very concerned with safety. They have turned out to be safe drivers. They're less likely to binge drink than the previous generations, and they want emotional safety, meaning they want to be protected from offensive comments and conflict. Finally, they're obviously tied to their phones and social media. They're likely to socialize using their phones rather than getting together in person. And if we want to reach this new generation, we need to see how they are different, due both to their social experiences and their digital devices. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Hi, this is Michael Ferris. I am the President, CEO, and General Counsel of Alliance Defending Freedom, and I've been friends with Point of View Radio for decades. This is such a great radio ministry. I'm personally a partner with Point of View, and I would encourage each of you to be a partner. Point of View gets information in a timely fashion to people who need to know the truth, and Point of View brings you the truth. It brings you a Christian perspective on the news, and it calls you to prayer and action in a timely manner. I'll never forget the day that freedom was preserved in the homeschool arena because of the work of Point of View Radio, leading the charge on that. And so always been grateful for that and would encourage you to be a part of the Point of View team. God bless you.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Mike Ferris was referring to something that happened in the 90s where homeschooling was threatened. There was something that was out there in Congress. They were trying to force parents who homeschool to have some kind of credentials to do so. And at that time, Mike Ferris had the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. He called Marlin, and Marlin got the word out, and we really shut down members' phones with all the calls that went in. We were able to make a difference on that, and it was a very important issue that's really affected generations. So that's just one example of the difference Point of View makes, and so we're asking for your support. Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts are here from First Liberty Institute. And, when we talk about the courts, the whole reason the left is in meltdown and was in meltdown over Kavanaugh and over the judicial nominations is that they've gotten used to using the federal courts to take away power from legislatures. And the courts have been like a super legislature. It's been a role it's an outsized role that wasn't appropriate, but it's part of the reason we have just the left going nuts right now, just absolutely bonkers. Even though Anthony Kennedy, often voted against what liberals wanted to do, he voted with them often enough that they continued to see the federal courts, and in particular the Supreme Court, as their substitute venue for implementing the social policies that they could not achieve through legislation. And now with Kavanaugh there, in a sense, that's going to disappear, isn't it?
Yes, it's gonna. That's why they're upset. We were talking off air, and one of the, a lot of groups out there, they have a mission statement and a vision statement. Like First Liberty, our mission is defending religious freedom in all these different arenas. But our vision is always, it's one of those aspirational things. You never think of actually getting there, But our vision was to return the country to religious freedom. That was the vision of our founding fathers. And I was just thinking over the last week or so, oh my gosh, it's happening. I mean, we haven't had 5 justices who were textualist or originalist since the 1930s. They're actually going to now begin interpreting religious freedom in the Constitution as the founders wrote it, not as they want to change it to, like some sort of legislator. So we are actually going to begin to see the return to the vision of our founders with regard to religious freedom and its fullest protection. That is huge. Again, the way people put it a lot of times, for the first time since the 1930s, we have 5 conservative justices. But see, people don't understand what they mean by conservative. It's not like they're liberals and conservatives.
Right, it's not like the legislature or the Congress.
What it means is, on the liberal side, they think they can just kind of do what they feel is right. Whereas if you're a conservative judge, what it means is you won't push conservatism on people. It means you will, as a judge, be conservative, meaning you will put yourself aside and say, it's whatever the statute says. It's whatever the Constitution says, even if I don't like it. My job is not to be a legislator because I'm not elected. My job is to be faithful to the Constitution and to the statutes as they're written. And so that's what that's going to do, is that's going to return power to the people. Because what's happened is, as these, again, and you can see how you can get in this mindset, well, I'm going to do good. I'm this liberal justice, and I'm going to do something that I think is good for the country. Well, you know what? That's not why you're there, okay? You're violating your oath by doing that. But now we're going to have people that are going to say, no, you know what? This issue isn't in the Constitution, so therefore it's not an issue for us to make a determination about. This is up to the people in the states. And now all the people are going to have to decide those issues. That's why they were so upset about what might happen with Roe v. Wade. But even if it does happen, what does it mean? Does it mean that the issue is now run by conservatives? No, it means that it goes back to the states. And those things will be battled out in the democratic process. Yeah. And same thing with gay marriage. Same thing with any of the areas where they have taken over. I also think the power of the government is going to be reduced dramatically. One of the things that Kavanaugh was known the most for is this whole idea of allowing the administrative state to have all this power, these unelected people that sit in the government forever. And then because of the way the Chevron deference and some of these cases are being interpreted, the deference was going to these unelected people. So it wasn't something that was passed by Congress, and yet they were given this power. Well, it's wrong. And people like Judge Kavanaugh, now Justice Kavanaugh, and before him, Gorsuch, had written extensively on this and said, this is not right. We're going to see power return to the people. This, it should be, everybody would be celebrating right now, but some people have their issue they want so bad that they don't care if it's illegitimate. They don't care if the courts are using its power. They want their abortion rights. They want their whatever. Instead of, this is returning power to the United States citizens to decide these issues ourselves. If it's not in the Constitution, it should be decided by the people. That's the way the government was set up, and we're going to see a lot more of that, I think, in the future.
To show how threatened the left feels about this, I read that Planned Parenthood, which has gotten way more political recently. They've actually admitted that they're going to get involved in politics, and they raise money for it. They are hiring a director of judicial nominations, and they're doing it with their C3, with their nonprofit side, not their legislative side. So that means whatever we give to Planned Parenthood is going to go toward this director of judicial nominations. It's going to be fighting this wonderful thing that's going on. So that just shows how upset the left is about this.
It should tell you if you give to Planned Parenthood, you might as well burn your money.
Yeah.
Because
but we do give through our tax dollars.
That judicial nominations director is going to be a waste of all money. Because do you think, I mean, it's all about who controls the Senate, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if the Senate's the way it is right now with a couple of extra Senate seats, which is what is expected for the Republicans after the elections, do you think they care what the Planned Parenthood, judicial nominations person thinks? In fact, it might help them go the other way. So, I mean, it's a waste of money, too. But you're right. What is it? $500 million of taxpayer money goes to Planned Parenthood, the number one abortion provider in the country. That should never happen. That's one of those things that Republicans and Democrats both are responsible for, because that should have been stopped by now.
Yes. Speaking of the left, and really the successes right now of constitutionalism in our government, the left is working hard to persuade people to their point of view through all different areas, education, academia, and that's been for decades, and also just online in many areas, social media. We've been talking a lot about, well, is Facebook, is Twitter, are they censoring conservatives? And the big censorer of really the elephant or the gorilla or whatever is Google. And now they're calling themselves the good censor. So we're going to speak with, the Media Research Center watches this stuff and reports on it. And a representative from that group is going to join us at the bottom of the hour. We're going to have a little time to talk about that. But before we do, Lathan, I put, and I just want people to look at this over the break. We've put two articles up. We put the cross monument picture. This is not the cross monument we've been talking about on Point of View. It's one in Greece, on a Greek island. It was leveled because it said it could be offensive to migrants. I thought, I think it was Kirby that might have sent me this picture.
Yes, it was.
And he sent it to all of us. And there's an article there, and there's a picture. That picture contrasts to me with the Bladensburg Cross that is still standing, that actually the Supreme Court could decide whether or not to protect that today, or to at least hear the case.
Yeah, exactly. They're conferencing on our case today, so we may know as soon as Monday if they're going to take that case. But hopefully that is an image that never, ever gets reproduced here in this country. If you're going to tear something down because it offends somebody, then we're going to tear everything down, because everything can be offensive to somebody. If everything is offensive, nothing is offensive. I mean, you have to draw a line somewhere.
This is one of the repercussions of what's happening in the courts. We'll talk about more of them later in the program, and we'll be right back.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to MediShare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. MediShare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
MediShare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without MediShare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you, 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute. And ladies and gentlemen, you know, after Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed to the Supreme Court just this last Saturday, several Google employees and executives began expressing their rage on Twitter. For instance, here's one. Design lead Dave Hogue tweeted, "You are finished, GOP. You polished the final nail for your own coffin," and then some that I can't read. And then continuing, he wasn't alone in his stance. Other Google employees had similar opinions. Ken Norton, who's with Google Ventures, shared a tweet promoting a pact to tell Senator Collins to vote no on Kavanaugh. He also tweeted, "Abolish the Senate." With us to discuss all of this and really the power of Google is Dan Gaynor. And Dan Gaynor is the Boone Pickens Free Market Fellow and Vice President for Business and Culture for the Media Research Center. Hi, Dan. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And this is all the rage right now. As everybody wants to, basically find out what's going on with these tech companies, these social media or search media companies. I guess that's what Google is, but its sister company, YouTube, is a social media company. And what we find is, overwhelmingly, every time we scratch the surface and go looking into these companies, we find out more liberal stuff. In the last couple of weeks, we had that reveal of the Google employees basically trying to fix the presidential election in 2016, where they tried to doctor how many people would turn out to vote. And what they did a get-out-the-vote campaign. Now, if you do a get-out-the-vote campaign, the theory is supposed to be you want everybody to vote. That's what, that's the idea. Is we're a democracy. We want to have everybody vote. The more people vote, the better. That wasn't their idea. Their idea was to get Hispanics to vote in key states so that they would help Hillary Clinton.
This was Google?
This was Google employees, yes. And the top executives knew about this plan. It didn't succeed because the great news here is Hispanics don't vote in a voting block. They vote based on what their interests and beliefs are. In Florida, basically 1/3 of Hispanics voted for Donald Trump, and so their whole plan kind of crashed on the shores of reality. Then right after the post-election, they had this big gathering in Google where all the executives are there and all the employees got all upset because Hillary lost. And then we just keep piling on. Just this week, we've come out with Breitbart had this real good release of an 85-page memo from Google, and it talks about being, quote, the good censor.
It depends on how you define good, doesn't it?
Yeah, it talks about the battle between free speech, the American idea, and controlled speech, was the European idea.
So Google seems to prefer the second.
All the tech companies seem to be heading that direction, and that's very scary. The Media Research Center is leading a coalition of more than 40 organizations on the right, and what we're trying to push these organizations toward is embracing the concept, the ideal of the First Amendment. We know we don't have any right to be on Twitter. As much as I like Twitter and I've been on there a long time, I don't have a constitutional right to tweet. But I do have a belief in the foundational principles of free speech. And so that's what we want them to embrace, but then every time we keep turning a corner, we find new examples of problems. And I hear a lot from the conservative movement, and people are very much worried.
Well, it should be. Obviously, this most recent one is really disturbing. I mean, Penna couldn't even read what he said, this is one of the top
letters that begin with the the sixth letter of the alphabet.
It's horrible. Now, here, what I'm wondering is, what is the solution to this? Because it seems to me that there's some different solutions. One would be obviously is if these tech companies would themselves decide to police themselves and come out with much more transparency as to what they're doing, and say they're not going to put their thumb on the scale. And when they do stop something, it's going to be because it's like, advocating somebody's, murder or, have some standards. And then
That
they're
everybody would object
Yeah,
to.
and then they would show everything they do censor and why they're censoring it. There could be something like that, which is sort of like a consumer bill of rights of that we get to see everything. The other is going to be more the government, which it seems to me the two big options there are either treat them like a monopoly or something, or a common carrier, which they really are, or simply take this protection away from them that the Congress has given them, that they're not responsible for what people say on their on their apparatus. And if you took that protection away, that would, boy, you talk about all of a sudden them having some serious problems. If they're responsible for everything that's said on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, that's a huge tool to have too. So what do is there a leading sort of, how do we get on top of this and how do we fix this?
Well, I think the best way, is to have these organizations embrace the concept of free speech, because they're extremely powerful. If you get into the battle of regulation in Washington, they'd be able to flood Washington with lobbyists and with funding for members of Congress. And if Republicans want to regulate Google and Facebook, et cetera, Democrats aren't going to want to. And so depending on how things go in another couple of weeks in the election, that might turn things. You're going to have Republicans who don't want to regulate. So even just getting a bill passed is going to be difficult. And then I've heard more and more people talking about the last example you're giving, where people don't realize this, but to boost the Internet, the Communications Decency Act 20 years ago or more gave tech companies a certain degree of protection so that people could post things on their website and all. That was when the tech companies weren't the most dominant forces on earth, and now they really are. They've got the top tech companies have combined net worth equal to the GDP of a top 10 nation in the world. That's much more than, for instance, a Russia would have, and they're considered at least a major global power. Okay, so no, yes, Google doesn't have nuclear weapons or an army, but it has a lot of power. So if you do that, though, guaranteed overnight you're going to crush the tech sector. Google, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all these operations are going to have to massively staff up. Their stocks are going to drop. The stock market itself is going to drop, and investors aren't going to like that. So it's not a small step. And I'm not saying no. I'm saying that whatever people are going to do, we have to go into this eyes wide open.
So the threat of it, Dan, one would hope that the threat of that happening would help them to begin to police themselves. But the problem with that is you already hear them making statements and trying to portray themselves as policing themselves. And so we have to, it has to be real.
You get into this issue of policing themselves. Everybody has a different opinion about what they want to see on these social media outlets. And so you go on, like, for instance, Facebook doesn't allow nudity. That sounds reasonable, unless, of course, you're posting great works of art from the Renaissance. And then suddenly paintings are getting censored out. And people are like, well, how come I can't post this painting? We've ceded control of the public sphere of conversation to private actors who, by default, believe in safety and civility more than they believe in free speech and freedom. And that is really a scary place. And the fact that all of these organizations are chock full of people who support only one political party and only one worldview is very dangerous. And for conservatives who are listening to this is not like the old days of media bias. We weren't on the networks kind of mess us over, but we could send out email or letters, mail things to people. We could exist. But in the new tech world, if Google, which controls something like 92% of all searches, if Google decides you don't exist anymore, for all intents and purposes, you don't exist. That's just it. Nobody can find that you even have an address. They can go search on the web. Oh, well, Dan Gaynor, I guess he must have
Dropped off the face of the earth.
Yes, that's how powerful this is. YouTube's the number one video platform. Google's the number one search platform. Facebook is the number one social media platform. Just those three. And then you throw in Twitter, because Twitter is where all the tech and pundits and journalists and all communicate. If you squeeze the conservative movement just out of those, it alters elections.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, out of one of those, and it's going to alter elections.
All right, Dan, thank you for defining the problem for us. We'll continue to discuss the problem after this break. Stay with us for more Point of View. The divorce rate is falling in America. According to an analysis of U.S. Census Bureau data, it fell 18% from 2008 to 2016, even after controlling for factors such as an aging population. University of Maryland sociology professor Philip Cohen found the drop was still 8%. Underneath this trend, there's both good and bad news. The good news is the marriages of Generation Xers, and to a greater extent millennials, are lasting longer. Couples are marrying later. They are more highly educated, a marker for marital stability. The bad news is that poorer and less educated Americans are choosing cohabitation over marriage. They may raise kids together, but their relationships are less durable. The marriage rate is dropping, and marriage is becoming what Alan Jacobs of the Institute for Family Studies calls a far more exclusive institution. Then there's a trend called gray divorce. The divorce rate among baby boomers has always been high, and it still is. It doubled for people ages 55 to 64 during the period from 1995 to 2015, and tripled for Americans 65 and older. This renders the drop among young people particularly striking, according to Susan Brown, a sociology professor at Bowling Green State University. She predicts the overall divorce rate will see a sustained decline in the coming years. So, the primary driver of this is a sort of inequality, where less educated young people think they have to wait to marry until they can afford a splashy wedding. A couple of out-of-wedlock kids come along, and they never get around to tying the knot. And the idea that grandparents are divorcing at high rates, how sad for them, their kids, and their grandkids, who only have pictures of past family traditions and togetherness that will never be part of their own lives. The next generation requires strong families to stand against massive cultural headwinds. These kiddos deserve married parents and grandparents. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
When my children were very small, I started listening, and even before they were school-aged, my eyes started being opened, and I started realizing that there was another religion being taught in our public schools, and I just wanted to let y'all know today I am joining. I just feel like that if the information is not there, then a lot of other ministries will not even have a chance to be where they are and do what they do.
I always wanted to give because I thought that Point of View really brings a lot of things out here in the open that you don't hear anywhere else. And it's unbelievable how much control they have over the minds of the people in this country and around the world. It's hard for me to believe that people fall for all this junk that they spread around. But what I like, Kirby and Penna, and I knew when I was hearing on there, well, I could count on it being something that you could but check into it, and the proof would be there.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. We need to know how to communicate truth to a secular world and to a church that's being infiltrated by ideas that are contrary to biblical truth. And that's what we try to do every day here at Point of View, to help you to be able to do that. And two people are in studio helping me today. That's Kelly Shackelford and also Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute. And earlier in the this hour, I pointed you to the website, pointofview.net, and it was an article and a picture about a cross monument on a Greek island that's been leveled. And it's been leveled because apparently people have objected because there's some kind of offense to Muslim boat migrants. Well, compare that to the Bladensburg Cross, the case that First Liberty Institute now wants the Supreme Court to take. And today in the Wall Street Journal, the editorial by Jeremy Dice has appeared in the Journal, and is a war memorial cross illegal? And it's all about the Bladensburg Cross, the stories of some of the soldiers that it was actually placed in honor of are in that article. It's an awesome article. I recommend you go to pointofview.net and read it. It just happened to show up today, Lathan, and it's also the day that the Supreme Court is actually looking at this case to decide whether or not to take it.
That's exactly right. I hope they read the Wall Street Journal this morning before they went into that meeting that only the 9 of them are allowed to be there. They discuss the cases, and they take a vote. Who wants to take this case? Who doesn't? You have to have 4 vote to take it. So we should find out maybe as soon as Monday if they voted to take the Bladensburg War Memorial case, or
we'll know Monday.
It could be as
early
as Monday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, because they conferenced today, they could decide, hey, we want to talk about this more and relist it to be conferenced again. But we know they were discussing it today, so we could know as soon as Monday that yes, they're going to take the case. Same goes for Coach Kennedy, who's listed for conference today. So next week could be very busy around the office if we get 2 cert grants from the Supreme Court next week.
Wow. So be listening next week because we'll report on that. Kelly, there's also another case I think is going to be filed with the Supreme Court, another big case.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. That's next week. It's everybody's heard about it, but now it's time for the Supreme Court, which is the next step, which is the sweet cakes. The Oregon,
Kleins.
Aaron and Melissa Klein of Oregon, who have been fined $135,000, had their business destroyed, bankrupted, ordered by the court below not to speak publicly their beliefs about marriage, all because they could not do a same-sex custom wedding cake because it violated their faith, and they referred them to somebody else who could do it, no problem, but they couldn't. And this is, of course, about a much bigger issue because it's about the whole country. It's about whether you can destroy people of faith who are running their business, whether the government can come in and say, you either violate your faith or we're going to destroy your business. And, that's not freedom. That's not religious freedom. And so that case will be filed in the U.S. Supreme Court next week.
Well, speaking of violating individuals' religious freedom, this is another one that's shocking because of Mr. Hauge, who was just trying to have a Bible study. In fact, he was asked to by people where he lives. And that case, there's been a development on that one.
Yeah, this is shocking, but I mean, we're seeing a number of cases like this right now. People who live in senior living facilities, and like a lot of those, they have a sort of a common area where people can say, hey, I want to use the so-and-so room, and they get a right to use it like everybody else. And so what happened in these senior living facilities, a lot of times, there's people that can't get around. Like there's one of the people there is in a wheelchair, another person that they can't leave the building. So what they did is they came to Ken And Ken is an 80-year-old, he's married, 80 years old, retired minister. They said, since we can't get out, would you do a Bible study?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I'd be happy to. So he just put in to use the same common area room that everybody else uses. And he was told no, that he could have a book club meeting, but not a Bible study. And so they were like, well, maybe I'll just do it in my room instead, Well, he got an eviction notice.
So he did it in his room.
Yeah, he did it in somebody else's room, and then there were too many for that room, so he said, I'll do it in my room. So they sent him a letter telling him that if he held a Bible study in his room, he's going to be evicted. You think you got to be making this up. We're not making it up. Go to firstliberty.org, look at the case. There's a video with Ken. You can even see the people who are there in the Bible study. You could see like one of the women's in a wheelchair and can't really go anywhere. Anyway, the update you're asking for is we have now filed this with Housing and Urban Development, which Ben Carson is the head of that major agency for the United States government. And this is a violation. This is religious discrimination in housing. It is not allowed under the law. And so we're going to be defending Ken and really every senior across the country who's in these living facilities.
So with Ben Carson there, is that one of those agencies that's still populated by the previous administration?
Well, somewhat, but he's replaced a number of people.
Okay.
And look, this should be something everybody should be against.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care whether you're liberal, conservative, or whatever. This is telling people that they can use the room, but they can't use it if they're going to study the Bible, and telling people we're going to evict you from your apartment because you're going to have a Bible study in your own home. That's outrageous. And there are so many. I bet everybody listening to this has either a mother or a grandmother or somebody in these living facilities. This cannot be allowed, and we've got to make sure we get a victory here. And so it's an important case, I think, people to watch for.
So, Lathan, this is one of those times when the hope would be that just some kind of communication from HUD to the retirement place would do the trick.
You would think, yeah. This is this case, and we have another one in Florida, very similar. And if we have two of these cases, there are more instances of this happening around the country. These are just the two that were lucky enough to come to First Liberty and have us help them out.
They are lucky.
But, Secretary Carson participates in a Bible study with other cabinet members in Washington, D.C. If he doesn't see this as an opportunity to set some things right in this country, then I would be shocked, because if it's happening in these two places that we know about, we know it's happening elsewhere. And Kelly's right, this does violate the law, and Secretary Carson's the perfect person to clarify that you can't do this in America.
Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We've got a lot more. We want to kind of talk about what the Kavanaugh effect is on the elections. We're going to do that in the next segment or two. We'll be right back.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you, 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. We're so glad you're with us. And in studio with me, of course, is Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute. And, you know, earlier in the week, I read something by Hugh Hewitt in the Washington Post. And it's an opinion piece entitled, "Trump may be outside of our norms, but he's succeeding for all of us." And, you know, we were just kind of talking about it during the break, how the personality of this man and just the way he operates was so different from other presidents that we've had. And, you know, we all have seen how some of the things that we kind of were uncomfortable with have actually worked to the advantage of retaining a constitutional way of governing. And it's been so apparent in this whole idea of confirming Judge Kavanaugh. I think, Lathan, and you were saying anybody else probably would have pulled that nomination before it got to go to the end. But he didn't do that.
No, and I think it comes from his own life experience, and I think it's just part of who he is. I think he probably made a decision at some point. If it's true, I will pull him. If it's not, I won't, and I don't care what happens. You know, if this is a good man and this isn't true about him, he deserves a fair process, and I want my guy on the court. And, you know, people can yell and scream and pound on the door of the Supreme Court all they want to, but if he deserves to be on there, I'm going to put him on there. And I think that is sort of a hallmark of him personally, and it has been of how he's tried to do things in D.C., and I think it is contagious. I think this is as strong as I've seen Mitch McConnell act in a long time. Chuck Grassley, you know, I think everyone was shocked at what, you know, Lindsey Graham came out guns blazing. I think that it is an indication of the impact that he's having on his own party in D.C., people who have been there for many, many years and thought that there's a certain way that things are done here, and this is how we play ball, and this is how we get things done. And they may have been very resistant to this guy riding into towns and, well, that's not how I do it, you know.
That's not how it's done. I think
exactly.
We all looked at some of the things he did and said, that's not how it's done. But now we're seeing how it's done hasn't actually worked for us that well sometimes.
And nothing succeeds like success.
Yeah.
Once they see him come in and do things his way and actually win, all of a sudden, okay, well, yeah, maybe we can go along with, maybe we can put up with parts of his way of doing things that we don't like if it gets us what we want.
And I'm amazed at the Democrats. I mean, usually the Democrats are much more, I think, clever in their politics. It seems like it's, the Republicans are always kind of foolish in the way they do their politics, with messaging and everything else and imaging and what they're doing. But here you have this guy Trump who ran and he kind of puts people off. Okay, with how he acts, how he treats people. Although his results are pretty incredible when you look at the economy, you look at the embassy in Jerusalem, you look at ISIS being just crushed. I mean, you look at all these things that were a problem under Obama that just in a year and a half are totally turned around. And we could go down the long list. lowest unemployment for African Americans in the history of the country, lowest unemployment for Hispanic, one of the lowest employments for women in, I think, 50 years. I mean, just, highest household income ever. I mean, all these things that we could go through. But he still was not doing so well when you looked at the midterms and what was coming. People just didn't like him as a person because he's hard to like sometimes. And he did some things that people go, that's inappropriate. You don't say that.
And sometimes the tweets would actually seem to undermine the things that he was trying to do.
Yeah, I mean,
and you
stuff
look
like
at that and just wonder.
If you remember, he kind of slapped LeBron James at one point in a tweet. It was like, and what he said was really dumb. And those kind of things made people not like him. And so it looked like, and there was a lot of energy in the elections in turning this thing. And that's the way it usually is in the midterms. And then we have the Kavanaugh hearing. And in that hearing, the Democrats acted much worse than Trump has ever acted. I mean, they were intentionally trying to destroy a man for their own politics with garbage and filth and all kinds of just unseemly tactics and everything they did. And they could say their words and everything, but people in America are smart enough to see through this stuff, and they saw it, and they didn't like it. Nobody else wants to be treated that way. And so they took their advantage, which was the sort of anti-Trump, he's scum, and they became scum in the way they acted.
They doubled down.
And what they've done is, everybody talks about the sort of enthusiasm gap. Okay, that gap's gone now. All the polls show that that's gone. And look at all the races, all these Senate races that were maybe close or they're all turning, massively turning. I mean, huge numbers of points because I think people don't like what they saw. And then all this sort of, Hillary Clinton saying we're going to be uncivil until we get control. Holder, who was the former law enforcement leader for our country under Obama, saying, Michelle says if they go low, you go high, which is a very appropriate comment. He said, no. Kick them. And all these statements and these people getting in senators' faces and surrounding them. And, people are watching this. And I don't even know how much this has showed up really in the polling. But I'm a real believer that when they go vote, that is going to affect a lot of voters. Because I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican or you're an independent. You're taught in America you don't act like that. And I'm not going to reward people who are going to act like that. And I think it's going to make a huge difference. And I'm amazed at how foolish the Democrats have been. I mean, it was sitting in their hands, and they make Trump look like a choir boy over the past, 3 to 4 weeks.
And to his credit, he mostly stayed fairly silent and just held to his position.
So I'm amazed at just from a standpoint of being smart and politically, savvy and all that, they lost it. And it's talked about now. It's the mob. Do you want the mob? Do you want all these things you saw scratching at and pounding at the Supreme Court? Are these the people you want running the country? Because evidently they're running the Democratic Party. I'm not saying that all Democrats are like that, but this is who was being played to. And this was their face. This is who they allowed control. So people get that, and I think that's going to and more than anybody realizes, I think that's going to have an impact when people go and vote over the next, people starting early voting now. I mean, I think it's already affecting people, but I think it's going to affect people all the way through the next, 3 weeks or so.
Kelly just asked a question. Do you want the mob? Perhaps some of you listening did favor a Democrat candidate. Is your thinking changing because of these tactics? What do you think of President Trump? Why don't you give us a call? We haven't opened up the phones yet. Let's do it. 800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In addition to my study of the millennial generation is my current research on the generation following them. Gene Twenge has given them the name iGen because their generation has always had digital devices like the iPod and the iPhone. They were born between 1995 and 2012. In fact, the leading edge of the iGen generation are now graduating from college. In many ways, they are different from previous generations, and here are just a few characteristics that Gene Twenge talks about in her book and articles. First, it appears that iGen is more focused on work than the millennial generation. A higher percentage of them are willing to work overtime to get a job done. That changed perception might have to do with the fact that they experienced the Great Recession a number of years ago. Second, the iGen generation is taking longer to work, drive, and date than previous generations. This will no doubt have an impact on their workplace. Twenge observes that managers who learn to be cheerleaders for millennials will find that they are more like therapists, life coaches, or parents for iGeners. Third, the iGen generation is not as confident as the millennial predecessors. Various surveys show that they are less confident about their career prospects. They have lower self-confidence than the previous generation at the same age. The latest generation also seems very concerned with safety. They have turned out to be safe drivers. They're less likely to binge drink than the previous generations, and they want emotional safety, meaning they want to be protected from offensive comments and conflict. Finally, they're obviously tied to their phones and social media. They are likely to socialize using their phones rather than getting together in person. And if we want to reach this new generation, we need to see how they are different, due both to their social experiences and their digital devices. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio, and we air Point of View on AFR, American Family Radio. Folks, Kirby Anderson and the team there deserve your financial support during this time. They don't ask a lot, but when they do ask, they need your financial support to make the ministry whole, to keep promoting the gospel and the truth about what's going on in our country. We consider them kindred spirits and partner in ministry at Point of View with us here at American Family Radio. So if you would, write them a check, give them a donation with your credit card, whatever you can do to help them keep the cause of Christ before the public on their radio program, Point of View.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Well, we're grateful for that encouragement to support Point of View coming from Tim Wildman. We air on many American Family radio stations, and you can support us by going to pointofview.net. There's a donate button there. You can join the team and give a monthly donation. We greatly appreciate it. Okay, we've got a full bank of phones, guys. Before we go, though, I did not ask you about one case that has it's kind of front and center right now. It's another one of your important matters, having to do with really a homeless shelter in Alaska. And, there's this liberal agenda that's even being forced into good works like that.
Yeah, this is one of the most outrageous cases we've ever had in our lives. And that says a lot, because we just talked earlier about an 80-year-old man being told he's going to be evicted if he holds a Bible study in his room. So this makes that look, mainstream. There was a battered women's shelter in Alaska that was run as a Christian organization, So what they do, obviously, they take women who have been physically harmed, and they help them. Well, a man who was identifying as a woman and was drunk said he wanted to come into the facility. Well, they said no. Hello, right? And they said, number one, he's drunk. But number two, even if he wasn't, we're not going to let a man in. I mean, these are battered women. They don't want a man sleeping in their facility with them, okay? So they got it. So the Civil Rights Commission in Alaska came after him, said, you're violating them because he's, identifying as a woman. Yeah, because he's really a man. And they had to get an attorney. Their attorney's good friend of mine, Kevin Clarkson, wonderful Christian guy who does a lot of religious freedom and civil rights cases up there, and he represented them. And he said, well, of course they have a right, religious freedom, etc., and they're not going to allow a man in their facility with battered women. The Civil Rights Commission then came after the attorney and brought charges against the attorney. So now, not only are we going to tell you as a Christian ministry that you can't keep men out of battered women's shelters, but number two, we're not going to even allow you to get counsel to represent you, because when they make the arguments that need to be made to protect you in court, we're going to come after you and charge you. I mean, you can't even make this. This is so extreme, you can't even make it up. Good news is this is now over as far as the charges against Kevin Clarkson and the shelter. We represented Kevin Clarkson at First Liberty Institute, and this has now all been thrown out. But just incredible. It shows you where this stuff is going and how insane some of it is.
So if you hadn't showed up, Kevin Clarkson would have probably had to pull out.
Yeah, I mean...
Or he would have been punished greatly.
Yeah, absolutely. And every attorney now could not represent people. I mean, it's crazy. The idea that attorney can't come in and make the arguments for somebody, then now you're a discriminator too. That's not how it works in this country. People get attorneys, and the attorneys can't be charged for representing their clients.
All right, let's take some calls. I asked you to call in, and guess what? We have a full bank of phones. So if you want to weigh in, you'll have to wait, but you can wait, and as the call drops off, you can come in. Let's go to Randy in Missouri. There's a battleground in the Senate. Yeah, Randy, absolutely. What's your comment?
Thanks for taking my call. I wanted to talk about my concern about the sudden unity in the Senate around the Kavanaugh hearing and how I feel like this is going to dissipate after the midterms. But just a couple of vignettes. One on the Google deal that you were talking about. A couple of browsers that are not Google friendly that people can use. One's called Epic, and the other one's called Brave. They don't support the Google cookie tracking platform. And, of course, there's a few search engines out there other than Google, like StartPage and DuckDuckGo, that also follow the same deal. So I hope that helps somebody out. We had talked about you talked about the abortion funding, Planned Parenthood funding earlier, and I don't know if anybody was paying attention to the mini omnibus bill that was passed last week during the Kavanaugh hearings, the $830 billion omnibus bill. That includes the second round of Planned Parenthood funding.
Amazing.
Under the Trump administration. So this is the second time they're getting funded by our elected officials. But I think this whole thing, there was unity. We all applaud Lindsey Graham's speech for Judge Kavanaugh, and all of this came at the last minute. But let's face it, the Senate has been so inept to support most of what Donald Trump has tried to put forth that they're considered dysfunctional. And had they not unified around the Kavanaugh hearing, I think they would have lost the base. So maybe not so much in the evangelical circles, but the main body of his base. So they were at a precipice, I think, that they had to come through with some unity to try to get through these midterm elections. And I'll just give you an example. Lindsey Graham, who in the defense of his speech that he made on for Judge Kavanaugh, he took the time to throw Judge Roy Moore under the bus and took a shot at him. And I just think that just shows you who Lindsey Graham really is. So I don't really think there's a turn of heart. You'd mentioned the 16 appointments. Yeah, they got to show themselves to be doing the job they were sent to Washington to do right now. I hope it continues, but
the election may make it easier for them to do their job.
Well, your state alone would make a big difference. Obviously, you could change. Is Claire McCaskill going to win or Josh Hawley? And if Josh Hawley wins, that's going to change things. Part of the reason why the drama was there at all was because we had these sort of Jeff Flake, Lisa Murkowski type senators that had to vote the right. You couldn't lose two of them. And again, if you change a Josh Hawley for McCaskill, you change a couple. I think most people think that North Dakota's changing. It's a huge difference in the polls there. It looks like that'll be a change. Now those don't matter. So you have, these things aren't as close, and therefore it would move through a lot cleaner. And one of the other things I will say, I'm not one to ever make excuses for the Senate because I think the House and the Senate just overall have done very little in many years, which is why people are so frustrated. It didn't seem to matter who got elected. But I will say this. The reason I think you can't see any good legislation go through, the reason why, for instance, they passed these omnibus bills and all this is that the Senate has a filibuster or cloture, whatever you want to call it. Notice what they don't have cloture for because of Harry Reid. Judges. Just a majority vote. So that's one of the reasons why they can do that without the help of the Democrats. They can pass through these judges. And that's why you're seeing a number of these judges go through, but they can't. But that's about all they can do because otherwise they have to have 60 votes to get anything done. And that's the trouble with getting anything through is the Democrats aren't going to cooperate, and they'd have to get 9 Democrats to come on board to get anything done. So you can see the problem they have right now with the numbers and with getting anything through the Senate, except for judges.
They don't seem to have much problem funding Planned Parenthood. This is the second time, and I surely like to find out about that mythical investigation on the body parts trafficking of Planned Parenthood that the Justice Department allegedly took up a year and a half ago.
Planned Parenthood has so much power that we don't even understand. They have so much sway, let's put it that way, over the Democrats that it's just unbelievable, really. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue to take your calls. We also want to dig into this mob activity, quote unquote, of the Democrats has been taking place, and Hillary Clinton's part in encouraging some of that, which is perhaps not surprising. We'll do all of that right after this.
Former U.S. Representative and Army Lieutenant Colonel Alan West.
What really does upset me, our ministries, our voices has to struggle to get their message out. And then we ask ourselves, why are we getting beat so much in the media sphere? This is what we're up against, folks. We don't support our own causes, but they have millions upon billions of dollars to do it. And if you want to keep your freedom, if you want to pass on with the greatness of the United States of America to your children or grandchildren, $1 a day? Come on now. We could do that. Kirby Anderson can't call George Soros. The other side can, and the other side does. We want to win this thing? Let's help support this ministry.
Imagine Paul Revere decided he was too tired on that night in 1775 if he'd sat home thinking someone else could do the job. Don't delay. Accept Colonel West's challenge. Do what you can as a beacon of truth. Now is the time. Write into pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute. We're taking your calls, 800-351-1212. Let's go to Ohio, where Elizabeth is waiting. Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks for calling in. I'm having trouble getting you. There you are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for calling. What is your question or comment?
Well, you had asked about how it was affecting our voting decisions, this whole back and forth and the behavior of the Democratic representatives throughout the Kavanaugh hearings and comparing it to President Trump's behaviors, things like that. The one thing I would like to say is it has caused me to do my homework. I have to really dig and research their voting records, legislation they've penned, things like that. I am a registered Republican and I am a Christian, but I don't necessarily always vote Republican. I don't like this party stuff. Let's just be Americans and do the right thing. And none of them are behaving well. That's the frustration, I think, for everyone. And I don't like bashing one over the other either. If I had my druthers, there would be no parties. There'd be people who represent, and you look at them individually. But it's really making us dig and read and study. I have my ballot already, and I'm just still researching.
Where do you go? How do you research?
Well, there are places online that have just fact-based sites. I don't want to name any, because I don't want to tout something, but you can. It's not hard to do. There's, like the League of Women Voters is one site. There are several, but I compare about 2 or 3 different sites usually, and I look at what is the issue, and it will say these are the concerns of the issue. These are what people have hesitation about. This is what they're attempting to do with the legislation, and you really have to process it and pray about it.
You do.
To figure out, what am I going to decide here? So,
voter guides are helpful, and this week I had a guest. His name is John Graves with Vision America. He's got a great voter guide, and he's not the only organization, but that would be one I would recommend that could give, because voter guides are factual. I mean, they really give you what happened. How did they vote, or what do they believe? How do they answer certain questions? And so that's, that can be part of the research. I appreciate your calling, Elizabeth, because I don't know if everybody's willing to do the work you're doing, but the fact that you're doing it, and I hope you share your results with everybody around you too.
Yeah, that's exactly what voters need to do. A lot of times, like if you look at polls like popularity polls, you will see Congress ranks somewhere right beneath like smallpox as to popularity, right?
Dear.
But people keep reelecting incumbents, and it's this phenomenon of people say, "Well, I hate Congress, but I really like my congressman. My guy's really good, but the Congress is just terrible.
Yeah.
They can't get anything done. But I really like this guy that comes to my Chamber of Commerce meeting once a month and tells me how great my hometown is." You're doing the right thing. Do your research and find out if the person is who they say they are, if they're voting the way they tell you that they're going to vote, and if they don't deserve your vote, then they don't deserve your vote. And that's the only way that things will change in a big way in this country, especially in your comments regarding political parties. Even within the party structure, you will see some change when people stop taking for granted just because the guy's got an R by his name or a D by her name, that means that I agree with them on everything and they deserve my vote.
Right.
So good for you. Everybody should do their homework and be informed voters.
We have an 18-year-old who's voting for the first time.
That's great.
And boy, she's like, "Mom, Dad, is it like this all the time?" I'm like, "Welcome to adulting."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, the one thing that's easy is if you're in a state with a Senate race, probably the biggest issue because of what we just talked about, because you can't really get anything through the Senate right now because of the the 60 it takes 60 votes for cloture to get anything voted on, and it's hard to get, one party to give 10 of their votes to the other party to get to 60. The one thing the one thing that doesn't take a majority is judges. And everybody just watched the Kavanaugh hearing. And the president very well might have, in the next 2 years, another Supreme Court seat open. There's all these lower court seats. What kind of judges do you want on the court as far as their judicial philosophy and how they approach the bench? Very different between the Democrat and Republican. I think everybody kind of knows and realizes by now kind of what that is. And so if you're voting on a Senate race, that's a big one. And you can look at the other issues, but in the next few years, that'll be one of it'll be the top issue. Of course, it's also the top issue of evangelicals who voted in the last presidential election. So it's why this is such a big issue.
And it's good that you mentioned the lower courts, because everybody pays attention to a Supreme Court nomination. It gets the most attention. But in our business, we know that the Circuit Court of Appeals level is where most of these issues are decided. And the Supreme Court is going to issue some very important decisions, and hopefully in our favor. But they get thousands of appeals. They may hear 1% of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so if your case doesn't go to the Supreme Court, it's that Circuit Court of Appeals decision that is the law in that part of the country. And that is where this president has been more successful than anyone at a rate confirming Circuit Court of Appeals judges. We mentioned earlier, I think 1 out of every 6 now are Trump appointees. So you're exactly right in those Senate races. If you want to see things get done, if you want to see more good judges on the bench, you got to have people on the president's team to vote to confirm it.
And let me give you an example, Penna. We have a guy, I think a lot of people know about the Oscar Rodriguez case, a guy who was in the military 33 years, got out, and he came up with a speech for the flag folding ceremony that we often see. And it ends, God bless our troops, God bless our flag, God bless America. And a guy said, hey, I'd like you to do that at my private retirement ceremony. He said, I'd be honored. He gets up to do it. He doesn't know that the colonel that heads that base has decided he don't want anybody mentioning God on the base, even at a private retirement ceremony. So while the film cameras are going, uniformed military gets up and grabs this guy and throws him out of the room. I mean, something I never thought I'd see in my life. And so we did everything we could to get the Air Force to, settle the case, and they refused. So we filed. Well, who's our judge? It's a guy that Trump appointed to the federal bench, a strong believer who actually had committed his time as a lawyer earlier in life to religious freedom. Wow. Now, that makes a difference. I'm like going, I'm glad this judge is on the court. I'm glad this is who we got. I know he's going to follow the Constitution. So that's how those things matter. It'll probably never get to the Supreme Court, but it's important.
So there's the decision.
That's right. It's important who you have as your judge right there.
Elizabeth, I will say that your daughter, did you say it's your daughter or your son that's voting for the first time?
Daughter.
She's blessed because she's got a mom that's going to teach her how to be a good voter for the rest of her life. So she's getting a great example. And dad. So kudos to you, and may your tribe increase. We appreciate your calling today, too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
All right, 800-351-1212. If you would like to talk about the election, what you're going to do, how has all this chaos affected you? And we did post something. You might want to look at it during the break. We'll talk about it afterwards. But it's a piece from the New York Post by Michael Goodwin. Where's the outrage over Hillary's call for a civil war? And, it's just very interesting that Hillary is she's not trying to be a presence of reason. She instead is saying that until the election's over, this kind of mob activity is actually what we should be doing. And so,
well, what's going on behind all this? What's the real issue is do the ends justify the means? And I mean, every Christian knows the answer to that question. No. But the only way she can say what she said is that philosophy is ruling her. That she doesn't think, until the Republicans are out of power, she doesn't think that we can be civil towards them. Okay? That isn't ends justify the means. That's all that is. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Mm-hmm. Okay? You fight for what is right, but the way you fight for what is right has to be done in a right way, or else you don't believe in morality. You think the ends justifies the means, then there is no morality in your life. You're going to do whatever it takes. You don't care. And this type of statement is very dangerous because it unleashes people who are unstable. And I think we all know we're going to see violence. We're going to see bad things happen if some people don't start standing up. And I mean Democrats especially, and act like adults here. I mean, Obama could do it. Michelle Obama would be a great person to do it. They can easily stand up and say, this is not how we act. And that's a statesman. That's a person who deserves to be elected. But we're not seeing that from anybody right now.
And the results could be concerning, to say the least. We continue to take your calls. We'll be back after this. The divorce rate is falling in America. According to an analysis of U.S. Census Bureau data, it fell 18% from 2008 to 2016. Even after controlling for factors such as an aging population, University of Maryland sociology professor Philip Cohen found the drop was still 8%. Underneath this trend, there's both good and bad news. The good news is the marriages of Generation Xers, and to a greater extent millennials, are lasting longer. Couples are marrying later. They are more highly educated, a marker for marital stability. The bad news is that poorer and less educated Americans are choosing cohabitation over marriage. They may raise kids together, but their relationships are less durable. The marriage rate is dropping, and marriage is becoming what Alan Jacobs of the Institute for Family Studies calls a far more exclusive institution. Then there's the trend called gray divorce. The divorce rate among baby boomers has always been high, and it still is. It doubled for people ages 55 to 64 during the period from 1995 to 2015, and tripled for Americans 65 and older. This renders the drop among young people particularly striking, according to Susan Brown, a sociology professor at Bowling Green State University. She predicts the overall divorce rate will see a sustained decline in the coming years. So, the primary driver of this is a sort of inequality, where less educated young people think they have to wait to marry until they can afford a splashy wedding. A couple of out-of-wedlock kids come along, and they never get around to tying the knot. And the idea that grandparents are divorcing at high rates, how sad for them, their kids, and their grandkids, who only have pictures of past family traditions and togetherness that will never be part of their own lives. The next generation requires strong families to stand against massive cultural headwinds. These kiddos deserve married parents and grandparents. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
This is Nancy from El Paso, Texas, and I strongly support Point of View, and I really would encourage all of you to contribute to this program, continuing and being able to reach out to others. The money that they get from us makes a difference in production, in writing, as well as getting the coordination necessary to present an adequate and complete program. It's a way of God reaching out to all of us.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Ladies and gentlemen, I mentioned voter guides, and I unfortunately wasn't aware. I guess this has been being developed and is actually ready to be launched on Monday, but we can kind of do a pre-launch today of our midterm election resources. So if you go to the Point of View website, pointofview.net, scroll down to Take Action and click on that, you can find 2018 midterm election resources, and you'll get voter guides and, for wherever you live and whatever you're looking at as far as voting. So there's a way to do your research that we make it easy. And so that person that was just speaking and asking you to donate to Point of View was referring to the things that we have beyond the radio broadcast, and that's one of them. So we encourage you to help us again. And on the website, the donate button is there. It's kind of royal blue. It says donate now. We love it if you take advantage of that. Well, this piece that I was mentioning from the Washington Post, it talks about Hillary and what she said. And let me just quote what she said, because I didn't do that before. You cannot be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you stand for and what you care about. She told this to CNN. That's why I believe if we are fortunate enough to win back the House and or the Senate, that's when the civility can start again. So not until then. But until then, the only thing that the Republicans seem to recognize and respect is strength. That's a declaration of war. It's a license for violence. And as Kelly and Lathan said, it's dangerous. She knows we're already in the danger zone when it comes to the political temperature. This article contrasted it to the way Trump acted or the things he said at the Kavanaugh swearing in. And some people did criticize him for not making statements to try to reconcile the two parties and all of that. But what he did do was say that, and he was speaking to the daughters. He said, your father is a great man, a man of decency, character, kindness, and courage. And then he just talked about what was done to him should have never been done. That character assassination attempt was one of the dirtiest tricks of politics and should never have been done. And he reiterated the way we should conduct politics in a sense. So I think it was a contrast to what Hillary did. And it just, hopefully we can come back to, and I think maybe it'll only happen if one's party, hopefully the party of the right and the party of biblical values, comes back into a little bit more power and we're not so evenly divided. I think that will help. What do you think?
Well, Hillary seems to think the Republicans only respond to strength, and I would say the Democrats only respond to election results. So if you want to see more of this, if you want to see things like what happened to Judge Kavanaugh continue to happen, then put them in power, because they have shown what they will do with power. I think they will stop doing things like that when it no longer benefits them to do it. If they see a backlash in this midterm election and it actually costs them the House, which by all conventional wisdom and political history, they should win the House. They should. Historically speaking,
opposing party to the president's
first
party
election
would.
cycle after a president's elected, the party out of power usually flips the House. They should win. If they don't, and someone can show them exit polling that says, you guys really overplayed your hand on Kavanaugh and it really irritated a lot of people and it cost you control of the House, then maybe some people in the Democratic Party, not Hillary Clinton, because I can tell you she is not ever going to change, but some in the Democratic Party, if for only their own self-interest, may stop doing this if they see that it costs them elections.
There's a divide in the Democratic Party. There's a civil war of some sort going on right now. The more radical, the sort of socialist Democrats, Saul Alinsky kind of base is ruling. That's the ones that think you get in people's face. It's revolution. Yeah. It's what is socialism? It's always revolution. Destroy everything, even though you're not sure what you're rebuilding. It's going to be some sort of nirvana. But those are the people, obviously, when you looked at what was happening in the Senate, that was the part that was winning, not the more moderate, the more common sense, half of the, and there's a real battle here. And so who wins that battle a lot of this message is going to be in the election. If there's a huge sort of slapback that we don't like this conduct of following people around and getting in their face, we don't want Ted Cruz and his wife harassed at the restaurant by a bunch of people that don't have any manners. We don't want, and you can go down the list of all the different people, all these different statements. Then guess what? The Democrats then who are in office will say, well, we're not following that group. The other group now is controlling our party because we want to win elections. And that's, the Republicans have their own battle. It's sort of the never Trumpers versus the, sort of the establishment versus more of the base and the populists that jump behind. But it's different in the Democratic Party. It really is a huge divide, and nobody's sure. Right now, the Bernie Sanders kind of, the socialist side is winning, but that was only in the Kavanaugh. Before that, if you remember, you saw a number of people saying impeach. If we get the House, we're going to impeach. You had Maxine Waters and some of these others. Then you had Chuck Schumer and others come out and say, oh, no. That's not where we're going. And so you had this more moderate Democrat versus the kind of revolution Democrat. And in Kavanaugh, they sort of took the mask off the one, and people didn't like it. And so it'll be interesting to see where they go as a party because they're in the middle of making decisions about this.
We've got a lot of calls, and a lot from Missouri, amazingly enough, where there's a big Senate race between Josh Hawley and Claire McCaskill. But let's take this one. Ann, listening in on KNEO. Hi, Ann, very quickly, because we're almost at the end of the show.
Yes, I will go quickly. I really enjoyed hearing Elizabeth talk, by the way, about doing the research. But one thing that is upsetting to me, I guess, and I don't know how it could be resolved, but you elect someone at basically a local level to be your representative. Like I'm the 7th District of Missouri, and they have all these wonderful ideas, and they get there, and then they get put on committees where they can't do anything, or they're considered the junior, no matter how old they are, they're the junior. And that's just frustrating to me that we've got people with good ideas. We've got people willing to battle their way and go to Washington with all these good ideas, and then they just get lost somewhere. In the rep.
Which makes it important who the leadership is, I think, in many cases.
Yeah, that's true. Our rep is, I'll just say it, he's Billy Long from Missouri. Billy hasn't done anything fabulous, but he is a good, strong Trump supporter. So that's what I tell my friends.
Thank you, Ann.
Trump.
We appreciate your call.
Yes.
And I do want to just give people the opportunity again to go to pointofview.net and check out our Take Action. As these elections approach, you can get information. Also, firstliberty.org, and we link through to First Liberty. You can see it. You can get there by going to the pictures of Kelly and Lathan, and you can go there. There's so much there. It's a rich website, and you can find out about all the cases and their activities. But thank you, too, for being with me today. And also, Doug, thank you for filling in today. And Steve, thanks so much. And Karen, everybody have a great weekend.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you, 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.